months, basically, since we've been able to meet, since we've been able to hang out, talk with each other. It's 3 months of isolation, not being able to move, being stuck, all these things that we've been talking about. And 3 months seems like a long time. But can you imagine if it was for 38 years? 38 years. I'm 35, and I know that sounds ancient to you guys. 35, go ahead and add 3 years onto that, right? That's older, 3 years older than me. There's a guy in the Bible. There's a guy in the Bible that was crippled and paralyzed for 38 years. For 38 years, this man was carried down to a pool every single day. Thought he was going to get better, and wasn't better. For 38 years, every single day, this guy would sit by the pool and wait for a healing. And we're going to jump into this scripture tonight. This is a story in John. This is chapter 5. This is called the healing at Bethesda. Okay, some of you guys know this story. We're going to get into it. He's going to pull it up. But for 38 years, this man would go down and think that he would be able to get into this pool. There was a healing pool, okay, where this angel would come down periodically, stir the pool up. The first person that would step their foot or toe or whatever into the water would be completely healed. This was a miraculous pool. Periodically, the angel would come down. The problem was this crippled man could not get himself into the pool. Every single time, somebody would beat him into the pool before him because he was paralyzed. Okay, so 38 years, this guy pays somebody to take him down to the pool every single day and tries to get in and cannot get in. And, when we talk about being stuck, we talk about, healing. But tonight, the title of my sermon is Get Well Soon. It's a play on words because he was sitting by a well. Okay? That's funny. That's a joke. But seriously, we're going to go to John chapter 5. This is, it's called Get Well Soon. And this is the healing at Bethesda. Picking up in verse 1. You know what? Okay, we'll go here. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. It's a funny word. We're going to try not to say it too much times. Which has 5 roof colonnades. That means porch. That's a fancy word for porches. In these lay a multitude of invalids. Okay, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed, the sick. All these people were laying under this thing, under these porches. These 5. I was actually there in Israel. Anyway, one man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. He'd been going for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" Now, if you're paralyzed for 38 years, this is kind of an interesting question. It's kind of like, yeah. I mean, obviously, I want to be healed. And sometimes, in some of the context, we got here, it says, do you want to be healed? That's the ESV, and the NIV right here, it says, do you want to get well? And in the Passion Translation, it says, do you truly want to be healed? And it's kind of an interesting question. Moving on. When Jesus saw him there, do you want to be healed? The sick man answered him, "Sir," yeah, you good. The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up while I am going another steps down before me." Jesus said to him, "Get up, take your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So immediately, this man is healed. Jesus walks up to a paralyzed man for 38 years who's been struggling to get into this pool every single day. And he walks up to him and he says, "Do you want to be healed? Do you truly want to be healed? Do you want to get well?" It seems like an obvious question. It seems like almost a cruel question as he asks the obvious question. And tonight, that's what I want to talk about. Tonight, I want to dissect these couple verses and figure out what Jesus was getting at. Where was Jesus coming from when he asked him the obvious question, do you want to get well? Does it bother you? Does it ever bother you when somebody asks the obvious question? Does that really just aren't you just really? That's what you're going to ask me right now? If somebody were to ask you, do you want coronavirus to end? Obviously, it's these are the dumb questions. You guys seen the Captain Obvious commercials? Like, that's what I'm talking about, like where he's walking around like the hotel and he's like, hotel pools are usually made of water. And hotel coffee usually had it. It's like the most obvious stupid things. And when people ask you like these questions, it's like, do you want the raise at work? Do you want to lose weight? Do you want to look good? Do you want the boyfriend? Do you want the girlfriend? Do you want good hair, good clothes? It's like, these are obvious. Like, yes, these are obvious questions. And people start asking other questions like, do you want to be free from anxiety? Do you want a life full of peace and happiness? And these are obvious questions that we can say yes to. But the tone in which they come out is so important. Have you guys gotten in a fight ever over a text message because the tone was misinterpreted? Because you sent something and you thought it was going to go one way and it went a completely different way, and then the next thing you know, you and your bestie are like totally fighting and it totally was not going that direction. Me and Kiana, we've just decided to call each other a lot more so we avoid these conversations. But if you know me, the response I hate more than anything is the letter K. If I'm having a full conversation with you and you respond, Jazz, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you respond K to me, it's like, bro, I deserve a lot more of an answer than that. We were having a conversation. I asked you a question or we wanted a decent response and you wrote me one letter. And it's like, that immediately like pisses me off. I'm not happy when people do that. I'm not okay with it. And it's like all of a sudden, it sets the conversation in a bad tone. And honestly, on their side, they're probably like, Kay, it's totally cool, you know what I mean? Like, and it's pissing me off on the other side. I'm like, Kay, really? That's what you're gonna tell me? But when we first read this, you can almost imagine, or you can kind of take yourself back to the scene. Put yourself back there, over 2,000 years ago where there's this pool Bethesda, and there's a multitude of people coming in. And Jesus comes up to this crippled man he's been there for 38 years, obviously had a reputation, he'd been coming there, and people knew about him. And people knew that this guy was crippled, people knew he was paralyzed. And Jesus, we can get this image almost of Jesus coming up to him and being like, do you even want to get well? Do you truly want to be healed, bro? And it's hard, and it's hard to imagine Jesus with this attitude, like standing over somebody, like, are you just happy being sick your whole life? You're just lame and sick your whole life. You even want to get healed? And I think, it comes off as almost a cruel statement. It comes off as that obvious kind of like, well, yeah, I want to get healed. I've been coming down here for 38 years and but I think a lot of us guys have this image of God, and that's how God is. God's like, if you want to get well, then prove it. Say so. You really want to get well, then tell me you want to get well, and work harder. Do better. Try more. Do gooder. I said gooder. But seriously, it's like we have this image of God. It's like, work hard, do better, try more. If you want to get well, show me, tell me. And that's not how God works. Here's the thing, guys. Is God, Jesus doesn't taunt people into transformation. He doesn't taunt people into transitioning their lives, into changing their lives. It's not a taunting, it's not a bullying thing where he comes in, do you even want to get well? Or you're just happy living like that. Jesus doesn't work like that. It's like, you want to change? Guess what? God wants to change you. And some people, it's like, some people will say, you'll hear people say this, that God only helps people that help themselves, right? Like, you can only lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. But I think that's completely wrong. It's very safe to say in the scripture, there's a paralyzed man that God helps, especially those that cannot help themselves. Those that are crippled, those that can't even get up, God is seeking out. Jesus came that day, which was a Sabbath day. We're going to talk about this next week, but Jesus sought him out that day. And went after him because he couldn't help himself. This guy was crippled for 38 years and Jesus shows up on the scene and in a moment he's healed. And he asks him the obvious question, do you want to get well? Remember a couple of weeks in our videos? Remember we asked this question a couple weeks ago? What was the first question that God asked humanity? What was it? Where are you? God asked Adam, and they were in the Garden of Eden, right after they sinned, and God goes up and he asks Adam, where are you? Because God didn't know where Adam was? God's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, all-powerful, all-knowing. He's everywhere at the same time, He knows everything. He knew where Adam was. But he asked an obvious question. Adam, where are you at, bro? Where are you at spiritually? Because he wanted Adam to respond to it. And Jesus, with the same heart of God, comes up to a paralyzed man and says, do you want to get healed? Do you want to get healed? Because why? Because sometimes Jesus wants to hear the response. He wants to hear us cry out and say, you know what? Yes, I do want to get healed. I've been coming down here for 38 years. I've tried it on myself. I tried it on my own, and I can't do it anymore. I can't do this anymore, and I need help. And we talked about that last week, is that's a great place to be. If I can't do this anymore, God says, great, now I can. Thank you for getting out of my way. Now I can. You just said I can't. That's perfect. Now we can start moving. So God is waiting for us to cry out sometimes, guys. Just like in Adam and Eve, he said, where are you, Adam? He asked the crippled man, do you want to get well? Yes. Yes, he wants to get well. Write this down if you're taking notes. Jesus had to make him want before he could make him walk. Jesus had to make him want before he could make him walk. This guy had lost all desire for life. For 38 years, it was the same thing, day in, day out. See, Jesus had to give him a desire of life before he could give him his miracle. Jesus had to change his way of thinking, redirect his way of thinking that pointed to everything else, and it had to point back to Jesus. See, guys, what happens with this sick man going to the pool of Bethesda for 38 years, day after day after day, is he surrounds himself by sick people, day after day after day. And this sick man has no idea what normal life is anymore, because he's surrounded himself by the paralyzed, by the crippled. And day after day he goes there, and you know what? It's, one day he probably gets taken advantage of, okay? It's like, it's a half and half deal. I'll take you down, but you got to pay me 50% now, you got to pay me 50% later. So day after day, he's got to pay guys. He's got to go down and he begs for his money, and the guys that carry him down there, he's got to give them a percentage to get him back to his house. Day after day, people take advantage of him. Day after day, his expectations are ruined. It's not getting healed. He can't get in the pool fast enough. And day after day, he just starts dwindling and dwindling and dwindling. And I think just maybe this guy was tired. I think he was tired of trying. I think he was giving up. He'd been disappointed so many times in life by the world, by the people around him, that he just decided to give up. And just wanted to lay there. Don't surround yourself by sick people, because you won't know the difference. See, guys, the paralyzed man actually represents sin. Represents the sin in our lives. And how we can get stuck living in sin, the same sin, day in and day out, doing the same thing, getting stuck, feeling like we're crippled, feeling like we're paralyzed, and we're not dealing with it, okay? We're not dealing with this sin, but you know what we're doing is we're surrounding ourselves by sick people. Sick people that have the same sin as us, so we can't tell the difference. When we're by ourselves, we know what kind of sin we're dealing with. When we get surrounded by the same sick people that are dealing with the same sins we are, now all of a sudden we're the same. Birds of the feather flock together. We're all getting high together. We're all drinking together. We're all having sex. Whatever it is, you guys can fill in the blanks. But this crippled, paralyzed man began to put himself next to the sick and the crippled, and he couldn't tell the difference between them and a healthy person. His normal had been lost. But Jesus comes up and he seeks him out and he asks him, do you want to get well? Yes. Of course he wants to get well. And I think, guys, what Jesus was really asking him in that moment is, are you tired of seeing yourself like a cripple? Are you tired of living the same way every day? Do you want to abandon this lifestyle forever? And do you want to be healed? Because that's what he was offering him. He tells him, stand up and walk. And the guy immediately gets up and walks out. And as we close, Keegan, you want to hit the keys? You guys catch this last part though? As he's pulling it, I'll just tell you guys. Jesus tells the guy, pick up your mat and leave. He tells him, you don't belong here anymore. Why? Because that's where sick people hang out. Jesus tells him, you're not sick anymore. You don't belong here anymore. I want you to pick up your mat and leave. Because this is a place where sick people congregate. And I've healed you, and I'm telling you, you don't belong here anymore. This is not your place in life anymore. You don't get to stay in here anymore, sir. You have to leave. You get to go out into the world. You're free. And some of us need it, guys. Some of us need the same healing power tonight. The same healing power that was stirring up the pool of Bethesda is available to you guys tonight. Some of us have been stuck for a very long time, living in the same sin, not moving, in a state of feeling like you're crippled and paralyzed. And Jesus is saying, it's for such a time as this, guys, that I've called you. It's time to stand up. It's time to move. And it's time to get away from this sick place. You've allowed yourself to sit here for too long. And Jesus is saying, for now, for such a time as this, we keep talking about this scripture. It comes out of Esther 4:14. For you are a royal priesthood, and your position is held for such a time as this. It says you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Guys, God is calling young men and young women to stand up and to fight and to stand for what they believe and to preach and to speak the truth and the word of the living God. God is calling young men and women right now. And he doesn't want you guys to let the world go by. For 38 years, this man watched the world go by him and didn't do a single thing about it. And God is calling you guys to stand up and move and to get away from the sick place. We've allowed ourselves to sit for too long. For too long, it's been in the same place, the same sin that's just held us back. We feel like we're crippled. Guys, Jesus is telling you it's time to stand up and it's time to move. It's time to go. So let's stand up and close.